The air in the terminal at BWI had the familiar stale taste of recycled oxygen, coffee, and floor wax. It was a smell I associated with beginnings and endings, but after 13 months in the dust and shimmering heat of Kandahar, it smelled like home. Every breath felt thick and wet, a heavy blanket of Chesapeake humidity I hadn't realized I'd missed. The whole journey back had been a series of decompressions, from the roaring Galix 17 to the sterile quiet of Ramstein, then the long, droning transatlantic flight where I'd stared at the flight map on the seatback screen, watching the little pixelated plane crawl across the ocean toward Maryland. I'd slept maybe 4 hours in the last 48, a fitful, dreamless sleep that did nothing to blunt the sharp edges of my fatigue. My uniform felt stiff, my boots heavy as I walked through the echoing halls. People stared, some with a nod of thanks, others with that polite, averted gaze that I was used to. I just wanted to get my bags, find a cab, and drive the final hour to my grandfather's house. My house now. The cab ride was a blur of green, so much green. Trees I couldn't name, but whose shapes were etched into my soul, their leaves so vibrant they almost hurt to look at after a year of 50 shades of brown. The driver, a talkative man from Ethiopia, tried to make conversation about the heat, the traffic, the Orioles. I gave him one-word answers, my mind already home, picturing the turn off the main road, the familiar bump as the asphalt gave way to the older, cracked pavement of Willow Creek Estates. I was picturing the house, the white clapboard siding that needed a fresh coat of paint, the wide porch with the swing my grandmother used to sit on. And beyond the house, past the sprawling oak tree, I was picturing the barn. It was the heart of the property, older than the house itself. Its timbers were hand-hewn oak, dark and dense as iron. The roof was corrugated metal, weathered to a soft, silvery gray that shone like a beacon in the afternoon sun. My grandfather had kept his tools there, his old Ford tractor, and decades of accumulated junk that told the story of his life. I'd spent my childhood in that barn, breathing in the scent of hay, oil, and old wood, a scent I could conjure in the driest, most desolate places on earth. It was my touchstone. The cab turned onto my street. The houses, newer constructions from the late 80s, looked the same as I remembered. Tidy lawns, minivans in the driveways, everything was in its right place. I leaned forward, my duffel bag digging into my lap, anticipating the first glimpse of that silver roof over the rise. We crested the small hill. There was my house, just as I'd left it. The paint was a little more peeled, the lawn a bit shaggy, but it was there. My home. But where the barn should have been, there was blue, a brilliant chemical turquoise blue, surrounded by a stark, black chain-link fence. "This is it, right? Number 214?" the driver asked, pulling over to the curb. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My brain was refusing to process the information my eyes were sending it. It was like a software glitch, a corrupted file. The image was impossible. Instead of the gentle slope of the silver roof, I saw the flat, shimmering surface of water. Instead of the wide, weathered barn doors, I saw white plastic lounge chairs and brightly colored umbrellas. A sign on the fence, in cheerful sans serif font, read, "Willow Creek Estates Community Pool, members only." "Sir, is this the right address?" "Yes," I managed to say, my voice a croak. I paid the man, my hands moving on autopilot, and stumbled out of the cab. He drove off, leaving me standing on the sidewalk in my uniform, my bags at my feet, staring at a gaping hole in my own history. My first thought, sharp and absurd, was that I was hallucinating. A symptom of extreme jet lag, maybe. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath of the humid air, and opened them again. The pool was still there, a monument to a colossal, world-breaking mistake. Either I was insane, or someone had torn down my grandfather's barn and built a swimming pool on my property while I was overseas. I wasn't sure which was worse. I left my bags on the porch and walked, my boots sinking into the overgrown grass of my own lawn. My steps were slow, deliberate, as if I were approaching an unexploded bomb. The fence was new, the metal still shiny. I gripped the chain link, the diamond pattern pressing into my palm. Inside the enclosure, the concrete patio was pristine, unstained. The water was so clear, I could see the painted black lines on the bottom of the deep end. There was a small pump house where the tractor shed used to be. Everything was neat, orderly, and utterly, profanely wrong. The barn wasn't just a building. It was the last piece of my grandfather. He'd died 2 years before I deployed, leaving me the 5 acres of land that had been in our family since the Civil War. The property was an island of history surrounded by a sea of suburban development. The developers had bought up all the surrounding farmland in the 80s, but my grandfather, a man as stubborn as the oak trees he loved, refused to sell. He'd sat on his porch with a shotgun across his lap the day the first bulldozer showed up. They eventually built around him, naming the subdivision after his farm, Willow Creek. He'd told me stories of raising that barn with his own father, of the dances they held there in the 40s, of sheltering neighbors' livestock during a hurricane. Every scratch on the floorboards, every nail hammered into the walls was a part of my story. And now it was gone, replaced by a sterile tub of chlorinated water and a sign that said, "Members Only." I felt a cold, quiet rage begin to build in my chest, a pressure I knew all too well. It was the kind of anger that didn't scream. It was the kind that got things done. I walked the perimeter of the fence. It cut a perfect rectangle out of my backyard, slicing right through the spot where my grandmother's vegetable garden used to be. It stopped just shy of the massive oak tree, its roots probably now threatened by a foundation of concrete and rebar. I followed the fence line back toward the street. It was erected on what I knew, with the certainty of a man whose profession was land surveying, to be my property. Not on the edge, not straddling a line, squarely, deeply, indefensibly inside it. Back on the porch, I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking slightly. The air inside the house was stale and thick with the smell of dust. A fine layer of it covered everything, a gray shroud over a year of my life. On the floor by the mail slot was a mountain of letters. Junk mail, bills, and a half-dozen thick manila envelopes with the same return address. Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. There were also several green certified mail slips, unclaimed. I'd set up mail forwarding, but for official-looking stuff, the post office often just held it. My fault. I'd been a little busy. I sat down on the dusty floor, my back against the door, and started opening the envelopes. The first few were boilerplate violation notices. My lawn was overgrown. A shutter was hanging loose. Standard stuff for an unoccupied house. Then they got more specific. The letters, dated 6 months back, began referencing an abandoned and dilapidated outbuilding. My barn. They called it a safety hazard, an eyesore, a detriment to community property values. They cited covenants and bylaws that I knew for a fact did not apply to my grandfather's land. He'd made sure of it. His deed was ironclad. The letters grew more aggressive. There was a notice of special assessment for all homeowners to fund a new community pool. And then the final one, the one that made the cold rage in my chest solidify into something hard and heavy as granite. It was a final notice of abatement and remediation. It stated that since the derelict structure on the unmaintained portion of community-adjacent property had not been addressed, the HOA, in accordance with its bylaws, would be taking action to remove the hazard at the owner's expense. It was signed by someone named Carol Peterson, President, Willow Creek Estates HOA. They hadn't made a mistake. They hadn't gotten the property lines confused. They had done this on purpose. They had declared my family's history a nuisance and erased it while I was on the other side of the world. I folded the letter, making the creases sharp and precise. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and drank a glass of water straight from the tap. It tasted of metal and minerals, the taste of my own well, my water, on my land. I looked out the window at the ridiculous blue rectangle that had no business being there, Carol Peterson. I had a name. That was a start. I took a long, hot shower, washing away the grime of travel and the dust of a foreign country. I changed into civilian clothes, jeans and a plain gray t-shirt that felt impossibly soft after a year in combat fatigues. I looked up Carol Peterson's address in the HOA directory I found in one of the envelopes. She lived 3 streets over, in one of the larger models with a 3-car garage and a lawn that looked like a green velvet carpet. As I walked through the neighborhood, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Kids on bikes swerved around me. A woman watering her petunias gave me a wary look. Did they all know? Were they all in on it? Did they have neighborhood barbecues on the spot where my grandfather taught me how to change the oil in his tractor? Carol's house was immaculate, aggressively so. The hedges were trimmed into perfect geometric shapes. There wasn't a single weed in her flower beds. A small, tasteful sign by the door read, "The Petersons." I rang the doorbell. A woman in her late 50s with a helmet of blonde hair and a crisp linen blouse opened the door. She had the kind of tight, pleasant smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Carol Peterson?" "I am." Her smile tightened a fraction. "My name is Sergeant Frank Miller. I live at 214 Willow Creek Drive, the old farmhouse." Recognition flickered in her eyes, quickly replaced by a carefully neutral expression. "Oh, yes. The Henderson property. We heard someone was moving back in. Welcome home." "Thank you. I have a few questions for you, Miss Peterson. About my barn. Please, call me Carol. And I'm afraid there's not much to discuss." The board took action according to the covenants. It was a clear safety hazard. Her tone was patient, as if explaining something simple to a child. "My property isn't part of the HOA, Carol. My grandfather's deed explicitly excludes it." She gave a little sigh, a theatrical display of forbearance. "That's a common misconception. When your grandfather passed, the property's status became ambiguous. And with it being left vacant for so long, the board had a responsibility to the community. That old barn was full of rotten vermin. It was pulling down everyone's property values. Every word was a carefully chosen insult, wrapped in the language of civic duty. My grandfather's legacy, a pile of rot. My home, an ambiguity. So, the board just decided to annex my land, tear down my building, and build a swimming pool. It wasn't your land, Mr. Miller. It was an abandoned parcel that reverted to community oversight. We have all the paperwork. Our lawyer handled everything. It's all perfectly legal. Honestly, you should be thanking us. The addition of the pool has increased your property value by at least 15%. I stared at her, at the unwavering certainty in her eyes. She genuinely believed what she was saying. Or she was the best liar I had ever met. In my line of work, I'd met some good ones. "I want to see this paperwork," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "All HOA documents are available to members in good standing," she chirped. "You'll need to pay your back dues and the special assessment for the pool construction first, of course. It's quite a tidy sum. Let's see, over a year of non-payment, plus penalties, plus the abatement fee for the barn removal, you're looking at close to $20,000. She delivered the number with a triumphant little smile. This was the checkmate. She thought she had me. A young soldier probably doesn't have that kind of money, will get scared off by the lawyers and the debt. He'll cut his losses and sell the land to the HOA for a fraction of its worth. I looked past her, into her pristine, beige-colored foyer. I saw a life built on rules and order, and the quiet, relentless exercise of the petty power. She had mistaken my grandfather's stubbornness for neglect, and my absence for surrender. She had fundamentally misjudged the situation. "I won't be paying you a dime, Carol," I said, my voice flat. "What I will be doing is getting my land back, and I'll be sending you the bill for the barn." Her smile vanished completely. "You'll be hearing from our lawyer, Mr. Miller." "I'm counting on it," I said. I turned and walked away, not giving her the satisfaction of another word. As I walked back to my dusty, empty house, the battle lines were drawn. She had her lawyer and her bylaws. I had a degree in civil engineering, a specialization in geomatics and land surveying from the Army Corps of Engineers, and a piece of paper signed by my great-great-grandfather. And I had a cold, burning rage that was now focused with military precision. The war for Willow Creek had begun. The first few days were a blur of logistics and rage suppression. I had to unpack, both literally and figuratively. I shoved a year's worth of uniforms and gear into closets, the scent of desert dust clinging to the fabric. I went grocery shopping, the sheer variety of food in the supermarket feeling obscene and overwhelming. I tried to reconnect with a few old friends, but the conversations were stilted. How could I explain the last year? How could I explain what had happened to my home? It all felt too big, too raw. So, I focused on the problem. Anger is a corrosive emotion if you let it sit, but it's a powerful fuel if you channel it. And I had a very specific engine to pour it into. My job in the Corps of Engineers wasn't about building bridges under fire, though I'd done that. My specialty was more precise. Geomatics. I mapped terrain, verified borders, and established legal property boundaries in hostile territories. I could read a survey plat like a novelist reads a book, seeing the story, the history, the conflicts hidden in the lines and numbers. Carol Peterson had started a land war with a land expert. It was a mistake she was going to regret. I turned my grandfather's old office into my command center. I cleared his desk of dusty paperwork and set up my laptop. My first objective was to gather intelligence. I needed every piece of paper that defined my property and the HOAs. I started with my own ammunition. In the bottom drawer of my grandfather's heavy oak desk, right where he told me it would be, was a fireproof lockbox. Inside was the original deed to the Henderson farm, dated 1884. It described the property in metes and bounds, referencing ancient oak trees and stone markers. With it was a more modern survey and title insurance policy from 1988, the year the developers bought the surrounding land. This was the key document. It was a legally binding agreement between my grandfather, Robert Henderson, and the Willow Creek Development Corporation. It contained a specific clause, drafted by my grandfather's lawyer, a man who believed in belts and suspenders. The clause explicitly stated that the 5-acre parcel known as Lot 1 was forever exempt from any and all covenants, restrictions, or financial obligations of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association, its successors, or assigns. Forever. The language was unambiguous. I had my copy. Now I needed to see what they thought they had. My next stop was the county records office. The building smelled of old paper and weak coffee. I spent 2 days straight hunched over a microfilm reader, my eyes burning, scrolling through decades of deeds, plats, and covenants for our county. I printed out the master plan for Willow Creek Estates, the original HOA formation documents, and every amendment filed since. I traced the lineage of my property and every adjacent lot. It was tedious, painstaking work, but it felt good. It was a process. It was control. In the military, you control what you can control. The rest is noise. This was my noise reduction. On the third day, I found it. It was filed 18 months ago, 6 months after my grandfather died, and just before I deployed. It was titled Voluntary Annexation Agreement. It purported to be an agreement signed by Robert Henderson, posthumously, to incorporate his Lot 1 into the Willow Creek Estates HOA. The signature was a crude, shaky imitation of my grandfather's hand. I knew his signature better than my own. I had a dozen of his old checks and letters in the desk at home. This wasn't even a good forgery. It was an insult. The document was notarized. I wrote down the notary's name and commission number. A quick search online revealed she was a paralegal at the law firm the HOA kept on retainer. Convenient. The document was filed with the county by Carol Peterson herself. Her signature was on the intake form. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a conspiracy. It was fraud, a felony. The cold knot in my stomach tightened. This was bigger than I thought. Armed with this knowledge, I decided my next move was to attend the monthly HOA board meeting. I wasn't going to lay all my cards on the table, not yet. This was a reconnaissance mission. I needed to see the enemy in their natural habitat, to understand their tactics and identify their weaknesses. The meeting was held in a soulless community center clubhouse next to my stolen pool. The air was thick with the scent of air freshener and simmering resentment. About 20 people were there, mostly retirees and a few younger couples who looked exhausted. Carol sat at the head of a long folding table, flanked by 4 other board members. They had the self-important air of people who took minutes and made motions. I sat in the back, just observing. The first hour was a masterclass in petty tyranny, a long, drawn-out debate about the approved shade of beige for mailbox posts. A woman was nearly in tears because she'd received a fine for her garden gnome, which was apparently an unapproved lawn ornament. A man argued passionately that his neighbor's basketball hoop was lowering the collective aesthetic standard of the cul-de-sac. Carol presided over it all with a serene, condescending authority. She used phrases like, "for the good of the community," and "we have to protect our property values," like a shield and a sword. She was a master at turning neighbors against each other over the most trivial things, all while positioning herself as the sole arbiter of decency and order. Her power was built on a foundation of manufactured consensus and fear of nonconformity. Finally, they opened the floor for new business. I stood up. "My name is Frank Miller, 214 Willow Creek Drive." A murmur went through the room. A few people turned to stare at me. Carol's face hardened, her pleasant mask dropping for a split second. "Mr. Miller, this is a meeting for members of the association," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "According to a document you filed with the county, I am a member," I replied. keeping my tone even. "I'm here to discuss the illegal seizure of my property and the destruction of my barn." The room went quiet. Carol's cheeks flushed a dull red. "That issue has been settled. The board acted in accordance with the covenants to remove an abandoned, unsafe structure from community property." "It wasn't community property, Carol. It was mine, and the document you used to claim it was based on a forged signature of a dead man." Gasps rippled through the audience. One of the board members, a nervous-looking man with a comb-over, leaned over and whispered something to Carol. She waved him off. "Those are very serious and frankly slanderous accusations," she said, her voice rising. "The HOA's legal counsel has validated every document. If you have a problem, you can take it up with them. This is not the proper forum." "This seems like the perfect forum to me," I said, letting my voice fill the room. "A lot of people here seem to be concerned about rules and property. Well, so am I. I have a deed that says my land is mine. You have a piece of paper with a fake signature on it. I just want to know which one this board and this community thinks should hold up." I looked around the room, making eye contact with the woman who loved her garden gnome, with the man who hated the basketball hoop. I was planting a seed of doubt. If the HOA could just take my land, what was stopping them from deciding someone's prize rose garden or custom-built deck was suddenly community property? Carol saw what I was doing. She banged a small gavel on the table. "You are out of order, Mr. Miller. This is a private meeting. I'm asking you to leave." "I'll leave," I said, holding up my hands in a gesture of mock surrender. "But this isn't over, not by a long shot." I walked out, feeling 20 pairs of eyes on my back. I hadn't won anything, not yet. But I had fired the first shot in the open. I had shown them I wasn't going to be intimidated. And more importantly, I had seen them. I had seen the cracks in Carol's authority, the nervousness of her board, the simmering discontent of the residents. My reconnaissance was a success. Now it was time to plan my campaign. The days following the HOA meeting were quiet, but it was the loaded silence of a battlefield before the first artillery shell lands. I knew Carol was talking to her lawyer. I knew she was circling the wagons. I used the time to escalate my own preparations. My strategy was simple. I would fight this war on two fronts. The first was legal. The second was a campaign for hearts and minds within the community itself. For the legal front, I started by pulling every permit filed with the county for the pool's construction. As a civil engineer, I knew what to look for. The application was a mess of photocopied documents. The key component was the site plan and survey submitted to the County Planning and Zoning Department. It was a digital file, a CAD drawing, and it was a work of fiction. I downloaded the file and opened it in my own professional software. The forger was sloppy. They had taken a legitimate survey of the HOA common area and digitally stitched in a portion of my property. They had manipulated the metadata, fudged the geodetic markers, and created a seamless, fraudulent map that made my land look like it had always been part of the community plot. To a busy county clerk with 100 permits to review, it would look plausible enough. To me, it was like a confession written in black and white. They had not only forged a signature on a deed, they had submitted a falsified legal document to a government agency to obtain a building permit. This elevated the issue from a civil dispute to criminal fraud. I spent an entire weekend in my front yard with my own professional-grade surveying equipment, a total station, and a GPS rover. I looked like a county worker, and my neighbors stared from behind their curtains as I meticulously shot points, measured angles, and drove wooden stakes with fluorescent pink flags into the ground. I re-established my property lines with millimeter accuracy based on the original 1988 survey and the county's official monumentation. My stakes formed a perfect damming rectangle. 2 of them were inside the pool fence. 1 was just inches from the concrete edge of the deep end. The 4th was right in the middle of the new brick-paved pathway to the women's changing room. I left the stakes there, let them stand as silent witnesses. While I was building my legal case, I launched the second front of my campaign. I started a blog. It was simple, clean, and utterly devoid of emotion. I called it The Willow Creek Land Dispute, a Factual Record. My first post was titled The History of Lot 1. I uploaded a high-resolution scan of my grandfather's original deed and the 1988 agreement explicitly excluding his property from the HOA. I wrote a brief, factual history of the Henderson farm. My second post was titled The Forged Annexation. I posted a scan of the fraudulent document next to a scan of my grandfather's actual signature from his will. I didn't call it a forgery myself. I simply presented the two images side by side and wrote, Exhibit A is the signature on the annexation agreement filed by Carol Peterson. Exhibit B is Robert Henderson's legal signature on file with the county. The community can draw its own conclusions. I printed out 100 flyers with the blog's web address and a simple headline. Do you know the truth about the community pool? I walked the entire neighborhood at 5 in the morning and put one in every resident's newspaper delivery box. By breakfast time, my quiet little blog had dozens of hits. By lunchtime, it had hundreds. The pushback was immediate. That afternoon, a cease and desist letter from the HOA's law firm was hand-delivered to my door by a surly courier. It was full of blustering legal threats, accusing me of defamation, libel, and slander against the good name of Carol Peterson and the HOA board. It demanded I take down the blog immediately or face a lawsuit that would, they promised, be financially ruinous. I read it, laughed, and filed it away in a folder labeled Evidence. Then I wrote a new blog post. I uploaded a scan of the cease and desist letter under the headline, The HOA's Response. The blog was having the desired effect. It was bypassing Carol's control of information. People were talking. I started getting anonymous emails. One was from a former board member who confirmed that Carol had pushed the pool project through with no oversight, claiming she had handled the land acquisition herself. Another was from a resident who complained about the contractor Carol had hired, a company called Prestige Pools and Patios, saying they'd left a mess and their workers were unprofessional. This gave me a new thread to pull. I did a corporate record search on Prestige Pools and Patios. The company was registered to a man named Gary Peterson. A quick social media search confirmed my suspicion. Gary Peterson was Carol's brother-in-law. She hadn't just hired a contractor, she'd hired family. I dug deeper. I found the HOA's annual budget, a public document, posted on their own website. The pool's line item was nearly $250,000, paid for by the special assessment and a large withdrawal from the reserve fund. I spent an afternoon calling 3 of the most reputable pool contractors in the state, giving them the exact dimensions and specifications of the Willow Creek pool. The highest quote I got was $160,000. Carol's brother-in-law had overcharged the community by almost $100,000. It wasn't just fraud anymore. It was starting to look a lot like embezzlement. My quiet war was attracting allies. One evening, there was a knock on my door. It was an elderly woman with kind, intelligent eyes. I recognized her from the HOA meeting. Mr. Miller, I'm Eleanor Gable. I live on the corner. I was a friend of your grandmother's. I invited her in. We sat in my dusty living room, and she got right to the point. I was on the HOA board for 10 years, she said. I quit 3 years ago because I couldn't stand to watch what Carol was doing. She's a bully who wraps herself in the flag of community rules. Mrs. Gable became my inside source. She knew the history, the personalities, the procedural weaknesses of the board. She told me about Carol's own little secrets. You want to see hypocrisy? She said, a glint in her eye. Take a walk behind her house. That garden shed of hers is bigger than my first apartment. And I'd be willing to bet my pension she never got an architectural review committee approval for it, let alone a county permit. The next morning, I used a public satellite imagery website and the county's property tax map. Mrs. Gable was right. The structure in Carol's backyard was a 2-story, fully wired she-shed with a kitchenette and a bathroom. It was a clear violation of a half-dozen HOA covenants about accessory dwelling units. More importantly, a search of county permit records showed no application had ever been filed for its construction. It was an illegal structure. The Queen of Rules was the biggest rule breaker of them all. I now had a complete arsenal: the forged deed, the fraudulent survey, the evidence of financial self-dealing and likely embezzlement, the proof of her own hypocrisy and illegal construction. I had enough to go to the district attorney and probably get Carol indicted. But that felt impersonal. It wouldn't fix the core problem, which was a community held hostage by a petty tyrant. A legal victory wouldn't be enough. I needed a public reckoning. I consulted a lawyer, an old Army buddy of my dad's, who specialized in property law. I laid out all my evidence on his conference table. He spent an hour looking through it, his expression growing more and more grim. "Frank," he said when he was done, "this is one of the most brazen cases of HOA overreach and outright fraud I have ever seen. We can sue them into oblivion." "I don't just want to sue them," I told him. "I want to dismantle her power structure from the inside. I want the residents to see exactly who they put in charge." He nodded slowly, a small smile playing on his lips. "A public execution. I like it. So, what's your plan?" "I'm going to request a special meeting of the entire homeowners association," I said. "I'm going to use their own rules against them. The bylaws state that a special meeting can be called by a petition of 10% of the members, and I think, after my little blog, I can get the signatures." My lawyer grinned. "You set the stage, son. I'll be sitting in the front row, ready to file the lawsuits the second the curtain falls." It took me less than 2 days to get the signatures. I walked door to door with a clipboard and a petition. Some people, the ones loyal to Carol, slammed their doors in my face, but most were willing to listen. They were tired of the fines, the constant nagging, the feeling of being watched. The story of my barn had become a symbol of their own frustrations. My blog had given them the facts, and my petition gave them a chance to do something about it. I got double the number of signatures I needed. I filed the petition with the HOA secretary, a nervous woman who looked at me like I was handing her a live grenade. The bylaws required the board to schedule the meeting within 30 days. Carol had no choice but to comply. She set the date for a Thursday night at the clubhouse. In the official notice sent to all residents, she framed it as an opportunity for the board to address the baseless and malicious rumors being circulated by a disgruntled individual. She was trying to frame the narrative, to make it about me, the outsider, versus her, the defender of the community. She was playing right into my hands. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing for that meeting with the same intensity I would have prepared for a mission briefing. I organized my evidence into a clear, logical sequence. I created a PowerPoint presentation. I rehearsed my speech, stripping it of all emotion, focusing only on the verifiable facts. I wasn't going to be a victim seeking sympathy. I was going to be an engineer presenting a structural analysis of a failed system, and that system was Carol Peterson. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Every seat was taken, and people were standing along the walls. My lawyer, Dave, was in the front row, a briefcase on his lap. Mrs. Gable gave me a reassuring nod from her seat. The air was electric with tension. Carol and her board sat at the head table, looking grim but defiant. She clearly expected to weather this storm, to use her mastery of parliamentary procedure and public shaming to put me in my place once and for all. Carol opened the meeting. Her voice was tight, her usual condescending warmth replaced with a brittle formality. She gave a short defensive speech about her years of thankless service to the community, about the difficult decisions the board has to make for the greater good, and about the dangers of listening to divisive elements who seek to undermine their peaceful neighborhood. Then she said, "The floor is now open to Mr. Miller, who has requested this meeting." I walked to the front of the room and plugged my laptop into the projector. The first slide lit up the screen behind Carol. It was the title, "A Review of the Willow Creek Community Pool Project." "Good evening," I began, my voice calm and steady. "My name is Frank Miller. I'm a civil engineer and a land surveyor. For the past month, I've been conducting a thorough review of the community pool project. Tonight, I'm going to present my findings to you, the homeowners who paid for it. I will only be presenting factual, verifiable information sourced from public records." I clicked to the next slide. It was a high-resolution image of my grandfather's 1988 deed, with the clause exempting his property from the HOA highlighted in yellow. Finding number 1. The land on which the pool is built was and is private property, explicitly and legally excluded from the HOA's jurisdiction. I clicked again. The forged annexation document appeared on the screen. Next to it, I put up 3 different examples of my grandfather's real signature. Finding number 2. The document used by the board to claim this land contains a forged signature. This document was filed with the county by Carol Peterson. A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Carol, sitting in front of the screen, couldn't see the images, but she could feel the mood in the room shifting. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "These are baseless forgeries." I ignored her and clicked to the next slide. It was the fraudulent survey plat they had submitted for the building permit. I had overlaid my own, accurate survey in red. The red lines of my property sat squarely over the image of the pool. Finding number 3. The board obtained the building permit for this project by submitting a fraudulent survey to the county. This is a felony offense. I explained in simple terms how the lines were manipulated, how the markers were falsified. The man who had complained about the basketball hoop, a retired draftsman, was nodding along, understanding exactly what he was seeing. I kept going, slide after damning slide. Finding number 4, the community was grossly overcharged for the construction of this pool. The next slide showed a table. On one side was the $247,000 invoice from Prestige Pools and Patios. On the other were the 3 quotes I had obtained, all ranging from $150,000 to $160,000. The winning bid was more than $80,000 higher than the market rate. Carol was on her feet now. We chose a contractor based on quality and reliability, not just the lowest price. "I'm sure you did," I said, my voice cold as ice. I clicked to the next slide. It was a photo from Carol's own Facebook page. It showed her, her husband, and another man at a family barbecue, all of them smiling. The caption she had written read, "Great afternoon with my favorite brother-in-law, Gary." I added my own text below the picture. Gary Peterson, owner, Prestige Pools and Patios. The room erupted. The sound was a roar of indignation. People were shouting, pointing at Carol. Her board members were shrinking in their seats, trying to physically distance themselves from her. But I wasn't done. Finding number 5, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. Funds for this overpriced, fraudulent contract appear to have been misappropriated from the HOA's reserve account. I showed them the budget, the line item transfers, the vague descriptions used to hide the movement of over $100,000. And finally, I said, clicking to the last, most personal slide. Finding number 6, the president of this homeowners association, who enforces our covenants so diligently, does not believe those rules apply to her. The final image was an aerial photograph of Carol's own property. Her illegal, unpermitted 2-story she shed was circled in red. Next to it, I listed the 5 separate HOA covenants it violated and the county building codes it broke. I turned off the projector. The room was silent for a moment, a stunned collective intake of breath. Then the chaos truly began. People were on their feet, yelling at Carol, at the board. "Thief!" someone shouted. "Fraud!" yelled another. The woman with the garden gnome stood on her chair and screamed, "You fined me $200 for a gnome, and you built a house in your backyard." Carol stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and fury. Her power, built on a carefully constructed illusion of legitimacy, had been shattered in the space of 15 minutes. She tried to yell, to bang her gavel, but no one was listening anymore. Mrs. Gable stood up, her voice clear and strong. "I move for an immediate vote of no confidence in the president, Carol Peterson, and the entire board." The motion was seconded by a dozen voices at once. The board members, seeing their own necks on the line, turned on her. The treasurer, the nervous man with the comb-over, was the first to break. I want the record to show I had reservations about the pool contract," he stammered. The others followed suit, a cascade of cowardice and self-preservation. I didn't stay to watch the rest. My job was done. I packed up my laptop and walked out of the clubhouse into the cool night air. Behind me, the shouting continued, the sound of a petty kingdom devouring itself. My lawyer, Dave, caught up with me in the parking lot, a wide grin on his face. "That," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "was better than any courtroom cross-examination I've ever seen. They're done, Frank. Utterly and completely done." He was right. The fallout was swift and brutal. The next day, a petition to recall the entire board was circulated, and it had nearly unanimous support. A new interim board was appointed, with Mrs. Gable as its chair. Dave, on my behalf, filed a massive lawsuit against the old HOA board members personally, and against Carol and her brother-in-law. Presented with my mountain of evidence, the forged documents, the fraudulent surveys, the financial records, the county district attorney's office launched its own criminal investigation. Carol and her husband put their house on the market a week later. They sold it at a loss and were gone before the first indictment came down. Last I heard, she and Gary were facing multiple felony charges for fraud and embezzlement. The HOA's insurance company settled my lawsuit quickly, paying for the full appraised value of my grandfather's barn and all my legal fees. They also agreed to pay for the removal of the pool. It's been a year now. The pool is gone. In its place is a large, ugly patch of dirt and gravel where the concrete shell used to be. The chain link fence is down, but the scar on the land remains. It's a slow process, healing a piece of earth after it's been violated. I've planted grass seed, but it's taking its time to grow in. I can't rebuild the barn. Not really. I can build a new structure on the old footprint, and I plan to. But I can't get back the hand-hewn timbers, the scent of a century of hay and hard work. I can't get back the place where my grandfather taught me how things worked. Carol Peterson took that from me, and for that, there is no real restitution. But as I sit on my porch swing, looking out over my land, my undisputed, wholly owned land, I feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. The neighborhood is different now. The constant low-grade fear is gone. People have stopped judging each other's lawns and started talking to each other again. Mrs. Gable has led the new board in dismantling the thicket of petty, vindictive rules Carol had created, replacing them with a few simple, common-sense guidelines. People wave when I drive by. The man with the basketball hoop invited me over for a beer. The woman with the garden gnome brought me a plate of cookies. I didn't go looking for a fight. I came home from one war zone simply wanting peace, only to find another one waiting on my doorstep. I fought it not with weapons, but with research, patience, and the skills my country had taught me. I proved that a single, determined person, armed with the truth, can dismantle a system built on lies. I didn't get my barn back, but I reclaimed my home. And in the quiet of the evening, as I watch the fireflies rise from the long grass where a concrete scar used to be, that feels like a victory.